Hi everyone, welcome to iNACOL's May Teacher Talk webinar. We're so grateful you all could join us today. My name is Natalie Abel. I'm a program manager with iNACOL, and I'm going to help facilitate tonight's webinar. So tonight we're going to be exploring how to teach with a growth mindset and how to build a growth mindset culture. And we're so excited to have some folks from Colorado's District 51 with us as panelists to share their insights and expertise and tell us a little bit about how they instill a culture of growth mindset in 5 steps in their district. So before we get started, I have just a few quick housekeeping items to run through quickly with you. In the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you should see a chat box. I encourage you to please introduce yourself. We'd love to know who you are, where you're tuning in from. If you're a teacher or a leader in a school or district that's personalized or competency-based, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. And we encourage you to share your own insights and expertise throughout the webinar as well so that the learning really goes both ways here. Oh, great, someone from Istanbul. That's so exciting. Great to have you. And I will be helping to monitor the chat box as well. So if you have questions, please ask them. We'll do our best to save some time to address those questions and make sure that you get out of this webinar what you came to learn tonight or today. We also encourage you to share what you're learning on Twitter too. If you are a fan of the Twitterverse, we'd love to connect with you there, and you can connect with our presenters today too, and we can share what we're learning with our networks beyond who's present today. So, and one more quick item, tonight's webinar will be recorded and archived. So we will send you an email after the webinar that'll include a link, and you'll be able to access this full webinar recording as well as download the slides. So you'll be able to refer back to this entire conversation and share the slides with your own peers and colleagues and teachers so that you all can learn beyond tonight. So with that, before we get started, I'd love to just get a quick pulse of who's with us this evening. So on the left-hand side of your screen, right under your name, you should see a little polling option that says yes or no. And I'd love to know, are you a teacher who is in a personalized or competency-based program? So you can just click yes or no, and we can get a sense of who's in the room. I see Karen's from Pittsburgh. That is my hometown as well, Karen. Okay, so it looks like we have more teachers and a few people who are not teachers. So a good mix of folks in here today. But please do continue to introduce yourselves, ask us a lot of questions, and share your own insights. And today we are so excited to have Rebecca Middles, who's the Executive Director of Performance-Based Systems in Colorado's District 51. And with her is a panel of teachers. So we have Carrie Wirtz, who's a 4th grade teacher at New Emerson STEAM School. And we have Tina Slay, who's a middle school teacher at East Middle School. And Felicia Casto, who's an instructional coach and enrichment teacher at Rimrock Elementary. So I will let them tell you a little bit more about themselves, and I will now turn it over to Rebecca to get us started today. So Rebecca, turning it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank all of you for joining us and giving us this opportunity to share our learning as a district. We know we will grow from this, and your questions and feedback will add to our learning, so we appreciate that opportunity. I know you just introduced us, but we also put some pictures there so you could kind of get a visual reference of some voices. So we might just say our names again with maybe a fun fact or how many years you've been in the district.
Hi, my name is Felicia Casto. I am an instructional coach and an enrichment teacher, which I'll define just because it can be different in different locations. I'm part of the specials rotation, so the kids go to PE, music, library computers, and they also come to me for some explicit teaching that we've designed.
And I'm Carrie Wirtz, and I teach 4th grade at New Emerson STEAM School. And I've been in the school district for 20 years and at New Emerson for 17 years. And this is our first year as a STEAM school, and we started off as a STEM school for 6 years.
And I'm Tina Slate. I've been in the district now for 15 years, and I've worked with gifted students all 15 years. For the last 5, though, I've worked with students in a full-time gifted program, as well as students that come to me for a gifted and talented elective.
I'm Rebecca Middles, Executive Director of Performance-Based Learning Systems here in the district, and I'm relatively new. I'm finishing up my 2nd year here in Colorado. We thought our pictures would help, but also if you can just make reference that way of the names, when we introduce some slides or some examples, we may just say this is Carrie, this is Peanut, so you might know how to reference that piece. We also feel that we want to get in just enough of our examples, but maybe leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So if there's something that you see that you might have want to know more about, well, there'll be some time at the end. So please keep that in mind, and we hope to address those towards the end. So to give you a framework or big picture about where this work comes into play for us, these are our implementation phases that we've outlined. That is our guideline to transformation to performance-based learning system. Each one of those phases unpacks into what you would expect to see at a district level and what you would see at a classroom level. And these 2 phases right here are actually just great, strong practices for any district. But you really want to make sure you have that solid foundation in place before you would move into building a performance-based learning system. Where our 5 steps for building a growth mindset culture come into play is really in the laying the foundation and going deeper into each step into supporting effective practices. So that's our big picture of how we build our foundation and lay the groundwork. But what that means for us as a district is these are our 3 focus areas that we've had the last couple of years, and we've been really focusing on building our culture and climate at our district and school sites and our alternative programs as well. The transparency of our journey in that work, where we share out where we've been successful, where we're challenged, and making that transparency known, and so that people are part of that conversation and have on-ramps into the journey. And spending time to do a truly shared vision versus a vision created by a few shared out. So really having opportunities to bring a lot of people to the table to build a shared vision of what we would like learning to look like for our graduates. So that's been our focus as a district, and how that transfers to learning at site levels and for our teachers. And I'm sure you have your own focus areas that you can relate to this with. But we've really been looking at our social emotional learning, which we reference here as SEL, our design for learning, which could be workshop or backwards by design, our learning environment, whether it's flexible and has access and learner-centered processes, which also goes into this one, which is our code of collaboration, and standard operating procedures. Do we have pieces in place where the learners own their learning community and their behavior and have a say in that, and what are operating procedures that help guide them to own that own learning? With a voice and choice option embedded, and building our relationships at all levels. These probably aren't too unfamiliar to you, and you may even have your own that you would add to that. I think the reason why we want to clarify this piece here is that we really believe starting with growth mindset and that we can change our behaviors and grow in our learning is a piece for not just our learners, but us all. So all of us in this system really focusing on that and that we can make that change. An outcome that this has led to has us building our teaching and learning framework and revisiting and doing a stronger implementation of our learning communities, as well as building professional learning design hubs for our adults that reflect these pieces that we're trying to do for our learners. So that's our big district view and how that plugs into this work. If you signed up for this webinar, I think the implicit expectation is that you're probably familiar with growth mindset, but just in case you weren't, this is really primarily coming from Carol Dweck's work, and that belief that when students believe they can get smarter, they understand that effort makes them stronger, and that it's not just about effort, but giving praise to the strategies that were tried or giving feedback to trying a new strategy. Not just keep trying it, but looking at the strategies you're using, and that learning is a process and there may be failure along the way. And eventually, and what Carol Dweck has said, I think I pulled this from one of her statements, is you want them to know, and that being learners, to know when to ask for help and when to use resources that are available. So again, the mindset work really supporting our student agency and advocacy view about helping learners own their own work. So essentially what we took from her work, and is also referenced on Mindset Online's website that is a support website for the book, is these 4 steps that she recommends. To learn to hear your fixed mindset voice, recognize that you have a choice, that you talk back to it with a growth mindset voice, and that you then take those actions, growth mindset actions. And while that's an important piece of her work, we added more to that, and you can see that incorporated and embedded into our 5 steps that we'll go over. This webinar is based off of these 5 steps. So our first practice is teaching about the brain at all levels, teaching about the different mindsets, which leads into then teaching productive self-talk, providing growth, feedback, and praise as a system to support that work, and then developing challenging goals. So we're going to go through each of these steps, and you're going to hear from the teachers in the room today about examples where they brought in. The poster that was used to advertise this webinar we've used in our design hub, and that's just a graphical representation of that work, those 5 steps, in a different format, which in our design hubs we also have what we call our learning continuum. And you probably can't read that very well, and that's something we can certainly get out to you later as a resource. But we wanted to give you a visual example of how we put each one of those steps. So for example, the top one's the brain, mindsets, and then self-talk. How each one of those has indicators at the emerging level, exploring level, applying, and then refining. So that us as adults in the system can know where we are, what we can celebrate that we're doing, and what a next step could be to move our thinking and our learning for our kids in our classroom. So this is a continuum that really assesses our learning and then knows how to differentiate within those pathways that we provide. The first step is teaching about the brain, and I've cited Judy Willis here as educational leadership article that she wrote, but it really talks about when you have learners become aware of how their brain works, you're helping them not only own that piece, but help them believe that they can create a more intelligent, creative, and powerful brain. And we truly believe that when kids are empowered with the knowledge of how their brain works, they're going to be empowered to make choices that can grow that intelligence. You're going to hear some more examples.
This is Carrie, and when we think about the brain first, we want children to understand that they have the power to make choices because they know how their brain works and what is happening in their brain. One of the ways we have done this in 4th grade is not only by teaching children the parts and the function of the brain, but by metaphorically relating their brain to being like a house with an upstairs and a downstairs. This comes from the book, The Whole Brain Child. And you can see the poster that's in the middle. It's referencing the upstairs and the downstairs brain. So I'm going to share with you how, the same way that I would with my 4th grade learners, today we're going to look at the upstairs part of our brain and the downstairs part. The upstairs brain is the thinking part, which is the problem-solving part, the planning part, and the empathetic part. The downstairs part of the brain is the part that keeps us safe and makes sure that our needs are met. When our upstairs brain is working well, then you have the ability to keep your emotions in check and think before you act. Our brains work best when the upstairs and the downstairs brain works together. Imagine that there are stairs connecting that upstairs and the downstairs, and that means that they are vertically aligned, meaning that the upstairs brain can help monitor the downstairs brain and vice versa. We want that stairway to be built so that all parts of our brain are working together as a whole. But sometimes the downstairs brain senses some trouble, becomes stressed out, and flips its lid. When we flip our lid, the downstairs brain is working on its own, and we need to help learners get back to where they need to be. You can see on the far right, there's a hand model that we can share with kids about what it looks like when their brain is flipped. Some ways we need to get back to that vertical alignment is engage, don't enrage, use it or lose it, move it or lose it.
Okay, so another activity that I have used in my classroom, and as well utilizing that book, The Fantastic Elastic Brain, and this is Felicia. So I've used this activity with 3rd and 4th graders. You can see the picture there in the middle. That's kind of what they look like at the end of the activity. And this activity comes from the book Mindsets in the Classroom, and you can see that resource at the end of our slides as well. So the kids get to act like neurons. So I usually choose 5 to 7 kids, however many that you think needs to be involved in front of the class, and take turns so everybody gets to be involved. And I have them choose a topic. And usually for the first example, I have them choose multiplication facts, because that's something in 3rd grade that's a pretty new skill for them, but also something that they have some mastery expected by the end of the year as well. The kids also love to choose activities when they first begin playing a sport or a music or something that they're interested in as well. So first of all, we talk about what prior knowledge they have with those multiplication facts. And so the connection, of course, at that point in time in their brain is very thin, if it even exists. So then I begin to hand out a thin piece of thread, and just a couple of students kind of begin to make that connection. And then I start talking with the kids, and they share about multiplication facts and what they know and how they have learned them, and I would connect the yarn with more students there, or give them the piece of yarn, the next kind of size up in the connection, and the kids might step a little bit closer together. And then I would ask the question of, how do you get better at your multiplication facts over time? And the connections then are becoming thicker, and more kids are grabbing a hold of that yarn. And you can see they're holding hands there, and they like to make that synapsis where the neurons are connecting, and they say buzz, just so that it keeps them engaged. And as students begin to talk about the strategies that they've developed about the multiplication facts and the efficiency of those strategies, I would hand out like a small piece of rope to demonstrate an even thicker connection of the neurons. And then the students end up in a tight cluster, as you can see in the picture there, as neurons do in your brain, tightly connected, and it's easier to recall those facts. And they also kind of think the activity's over, but then I ask them, so what do you think happens over summer break, or when you're not practicing your multiplication facts every day? And without even guiding them, they just begin to take a step back and dropping those connections. They just know. And as an enrichment teacher, it's been great to hear from the classroom teacher's perspective that these activities that we've been doing are carrying over to the classroom, and the kids are asking these questions, and the teachers then are asking as well. So we've got this carryover being followed up upon in their classroom.
Okay, so this is Tina, and I'm going to share some things that we do at the middle school level. I work with 6th, 7th, and 8th, but in 6th grade we really start with the basics of growth mindset. And so we start by just teaching how the brain functions, and I have the students build brains out of clay, with clay, so they build a replica. We have lots of clay models of the brain in the room that they can use, and they build it, label it, so they know all the different parts and how they function. And then we can start talking about that interaction between the upstairs and the downstairs. And we also build the neurons so that they know the different parts and how those connect. We use recycled material, and the students each build their own neuron, and then we connect them down the hallway in our school. And so that's just a great way to make sure they understand the basics and how the brain functions. Another thing, just sort of an anticipatory set that I use with the students, is this analogy of thinking that you're full and you know everything, sort of that intellectual arrogance. So the students, and I put a little synopsis up here so you could use it. I learned this at an NAGC conference from Dr. Tricia Easterling. And so she uses the blue dyed water in one sponge that's already full, and the other one is dry and open to new learning. And so when you put them in the blue dye, the sponge that isn't already full soaks up more learning. And so you can see that in the clear cups that she put the liquid in. So it's just a great metaphor for students to try to think about going into new situations with an open mind, and rather than thinking they've already learned it all, which, as you know, sometimes the GT students sometimes think that they do already know it all. So it's just a great analogy that I use to start conversations.
So that's the summary of some examples of our first step in the growing the growth mindset culture. This next one, our second one, is teach about the different mindsets. And I think that this is probably the one that Carol Dweck's work is most associated with and most known for. And it talks about just being aware of the different mindsets that you might be channeling or listening to. Not that we're either growth or fixed, it's a continuum, but what voice are you hearing and being able to acknowledge that. And I'm sure, if you haven't, there's this world called Pinterest. I'm sure you've gone and you've looked at growth mindset, and it's a little overwhelming with all of the wonderful resources. But these are immediately pulled from that. But I would only say that one thing to think about when using these examples is you're really looking at it either being fixed or growth, and helping people understand that there is a continuum. In the versus language and kind of only showing it one or the other, although that can be helpful to learn it at first, I think the next stage needs to be really talking about what does that look like to be more of a continuum. Are you leaning more towards the fix, leaning more towards the growth? Where are you finding yourself on this challenge? And having that conversation. So although there's lots of great resources, just a caution that we've used or we've taken into account when we're using that.
This is Tina. I just added this in because for the middle school level, I think the Star Wars analogy is great. We have these posters throughout our classrooms in the building. And so I found it on Pinterest, and it uses the Mindset Works basic model of the two different mindsets. And we talk about at least a mixed mindset as well, and then are starting to incorporate the continuum. The other thing that I add to the middle schoolers is I'll purchase small little stuffed Yoda dolls, and then when I see a student that's really shown some growth in their either self-talk or what they're saying out loud, their growth mindset, I'll give them a Yoda doll, you know, just to praise that mindset and the change that they're making.
This is Carrie, and here's one activity that I like to do at the beginning of the year to teach growth mindset. And keep in mind, this comes after talking about growth mindset and fixed mindset and sharing examples of this. So you can see on the left, there's a group of students there, and before they get to this stage, we talk about that we're going to do an activity that they have to employ the habits of mind and a growth mindset in order to accomplish this task. So they get together and they talk about a time where they came across a task or something that was hard for them, and they talk about the strategies that they used to accomplish or overcome that hardness, or self-talk that they did in order to get over those hard parts. As they reflect on that and share what they did, I remind them that during this activity they may have to do the same self-talk or the same strategies. The first thing they do when introducing this activity is to give them 6 cups. And you can see in the slide on the, or the picture on the right, that they have 6 red cups. I give them the cups and tell them that they need to build a pyramid during this activity, and they look at me like, Miss Carey, you're crazy, this is going to be easy to do. And then I tell them the more challenging part to this activity, which is they're not able to use their hands to build a pyramid. They have to use the, it gives them a rubber band, and there's 4 pieces of yarn attached to it. And they have to use that tool in order to build the pyramid and take the pyramid down. And then it becomes a little more challenging when they start thinking about how they're going to accomplish that task. So they're in their teams, they start working, and I just bop around from group to group and begin to ask them questions to help them talk through their thinking. What's working, what's not working, why do you think that isn't working, what changes could you make, is there another group that you could go talk to? And the teamwork that they have to do really helps them accomplish this task. And you can see the picture on the right, they've accomplished it And it's not something that they can do quickly. It's a process that they do over time. After we finish, and each team has accomplished building the pyramid, taking the pyramid down, we talk about what worked well within the classroom and what we would change for next time based on successes or failures, and what they could learn from each group and one another. And we really talk about if there was failure, going forward, how we could overcome that. And then the final step for them is to go to their mindset reflection journal. And you can see there's a picture of the students there in the middle. And they just need to reflect on using the process. And they can use a graphical organizers, sentence stems, or they can just share down their thinking and their thoughts. And that's a really powerful tool that we use in the classroom as well.
So this is the second step for examples that we have on the slides. Before we move into the third step, I would say that we really advocate spending some time teaching about the brain and the difference between growth and fix and the continuum with your learners before you move into this next step. Although I do think this is probably one of the biggest steps in the 5 steps that often gets overlooked. And we call it self-talk, but it's about teaching productive self-talk. And I'm sure you have had learners where you may have seen that this is not evident, and this is what we're talking about when people will say often trauma-informed instruction, when they talk about mental health and strategies they can use to help support their learners, as well as anxiety and increased anxiety that we're seeing. So this is really a piece that we're using, whether it's you're addressing generational poverty or issues of equity. But we do feel that this is a piece that all learners should be exposed to, at least to know that skill set. And we pulled a quote here from Psychology Today, and I like that it talks about when you have that availability to gain perspective, to step back and away from the negative thoughts, that you're actually able to make change within yourself and have foster success because you're able to see it from a little bit of a distance. If you go into that article even further, which we have that resource cited later, it actually talks about the use of when to use third person and when you might use first person to change behavior. And I think those are important pieces, and a lot of that work is really blowing up right now about how to address those needs of our learners. And when you think about it, successful people that we often use, and there's those posters out there for growth mindset about successful people and all the failures that they've experienced. And typically, when you dig into that, they have strong ability to do that self-talk, to talk themselves through failure and believe that they can stay on that path. And that's a skill we want for all kids. So this is our third step that we'll go into, and it's also probably the one that we know can be the most challenging for folks. I think great teachers have always done this, but maybe not even been aware of it. But really having that conversation about what does that look like, new and old teachers alike, and what can we do as a strategy, as a system to build that support with our learners. So changing that way, if we have the negative self-talk and kids can identify it, how do we change that to positive? And there's different strategies for different levels. I think it's an important strategy for adults as well. But when we think about the different levels of learners, you're going to hear different takes on that when we share. This is another commonly shared example that's out there. I'm sure it's on Pinterest somewhere too. But if you'll notice, you've got a student on the left here who maybe draws a picture of herself and introduces herself and a growth mindset tagline. I know this is very common when I was an educator in Alaska, where we would have learners draw themselves and how they see themselves, and then productive self-talk or productive mindset phrases that they would use. What's interesting about the one to the right is this is actually the same learner at the top there with a haircut. Ironically, the longer hair is associated with the growth mindset and the shorter hair fixed mindset. Whether that was on purpose, I'm not sure. But he talks about his own language that he has after he made a mistake, when he can channel his growth mindset language ideas and his fixed mindset self-talk language ideas. And this class had also done that same practice for writing, reading, and math. So you see that there's examples to embed what people may already be doing in their classroom and having kids identify what we mean when we say self-talk. I know, Brigitte, you probably have done something similar to that too, I think, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's been great for the kids to actually see those and see me with a fixed mindset and then watch me model how I would change that into a growth mindset. And so the kids have got to do a similar activity as what's up here as well. And one little second grader came up with keep on swimming from Finding Nemo, and so I used it as a teaching moment to kind of pull in and engagement in their outside world with video games and media that they use, and so they were able to pull in some other phrases that they would actually say to themselves, not what I tell them that they should say. And a lot of kids, I mentioned video games, a lot of the video games that kids are involved in, and when they fail a level or something, it says you failed or keep trying, or so they've taken those words and they've rewritten them for what would be more encouraging for a kid to see when they are struggling to get through something.
And a secondary example, or some secondary examples that we've seen work as well, is when learners in classrooms have generated, and you'll see this on the left, perhaps a list of things they know that they said to themselves, or they may think others might say to themselves, is that a safer way to start it? And it doesn't have to be, I'm not good at math, right? It could be reading, writing, art, sports. But whatever self-talk they've heard themselves say, and generate another list about ways they could contradict that with more of a growth mindset phrase, to really nailing that kind of explicit idea of this is one thing you could say, this is something you could start saying instead. And having that list to refer to as a class. And I've seen kids point to that list when working with another student and talking about what might you be saying or how could you change that, and use that list as a class. Another example.
So this is something I wanted to share from the middle school level. The first thing, and usually I use it as a culminating event, is this really great video from Nova Science Now called How Smart Can We Get? And it really just sums up everything, learning about the brain, the mindset, self-talk, and goals. But one particular piece that I wanted to pull out is the part about writing about worries and how it eases anxiety. And just using journaling to ease the anxiety. So Sion Baylock, who is the associate professor at the University of Chicago, came up with this idea after really suffering through a crushing failure. And so she wanted to do her research to find out what happened in her brain during that failure. And so what she really found was that when you activate that emotional center, it interrupts the working memory. And so her and her researchers went on to do some different trials to see if they felt like journaling could ease that stress and shut down the emotional center so that the working memory could do what it was supposed to do. And so her team proved that if students would journal for 10 minutes, it eased the stress and the anxiety, and students improved their test score by over 12%. And so we use that in the classroom. We talk about when they're stressed or they're anxious, not only self-talk, but also journaling or drawing and doodling, but just getting those stresses either out through self-talk or through journaling, that's had a huge impact on our middle schoolers.
I want to pause and say, I just want to let you know we are enjoying all your comments and questions, and thank you for that feedback, and we're looking forward to the question time at the end. So just know that we are reading those as we are presenting, so appreciate that time that you're taking to do that. Another resource that's helpful for the self-talk piece, for those I think that might feel like it's a little bit more of an uncomfortable area, this is another resource that's been very helpful. It has some key areas about how you might go about getting to know your learners better. But I think particularly a chart that's on, I think it's maybe page 69 in this book, that talks about things that you might be observing. So as a teacher in your classroom, taking time to step back and observe your learners, are you seeing a learner that's not starting their work? Says he or she is thinking for a long period of time and just really slow to start. And the stance that they're saying they might need to work on is optimism here. But what I think is most useful about this chart is on the right side, it has some self-talk that a learner could maybe start using. And I like that there's choices. They might tweak it and make it their own, change a word. But in a conferencing one-to-one situation, this could be very helpful for a teacher that's not, this isn't a go-to strength area for them, but they have a resource that they can develop. So if you're seeing some of these activities with your learners, here's an example self-talk that you might bring into a one-to-one conference or even a personal goal. So another useful tool out there. But essentially those first three steps are really building that belief that if you have the mindset, you believe you can grow that mindset, and that you know how to do the self-talk, you really have the ingredients needed to change behavior and to make a habit change. this next piece, the fourth step, is really about, as a system, do we also then circle around, wrap around that learning to make sure that we are also role modeling that in what we choose to give feedback and praise to. I think as teachers, we're pretty good about giving constructive feedback. There's some examples there. But I think also there could be unintentional consequences about praise. And I think Carol Dweck spends a lot of time talking about that. But when we choose to praise, for example, learners that might get done quickly, or it looked easy for them, the message that we might be giving unintentionally to the rest of the kids is, you must be smart because this was easy and it was quick. So just another noticeable thing for us to keep thinking about as teachers in the system, but also as educators at all levels, even with an adult-to-adult conversations. Are we changing the way we give feedback and praise? And you'll hear some more examples of those resources coming up. Another activity that brings in the self-talk and the feedback piece is a simple T-chart. Having learners share some things that they might say to themselves if you want, and then you could come back and visit this activity to have them brainstorm things they might say to a friend. So growth, and then if they have fixed, how they might change it. So just a simple T-chart visual.
This is Felicia again, and as Rebecca said, this feedback and praise also goes with self-talk. I seem to find myself working on both of them in my classroom, and I'm sure that you've seen the poster around change your words, change your mindset. So what I have done in the last couple of years is taken this growth mindset feedback tool that you can see on the right, and it's from Mindset Works. It has some example statements to say to kids when they are struggling with strong effort, or when they put little effort into something and they automatically get the right answer. So what I've done is, as you can see on the left, I've taken some sticky notes and just changed some of the words, tweaked them to make them my own, something that sounds like I would say. For example, like when I'm giving a number talk, I find myself just being like, oh, great, instead of, saying something a little more productive or growth producing. So I would just put that sticky note on my plan book or on my computer screen or wherever I'm going to be needing to see that as just that visual reminder. And my fourth grade group of challenge kiddos, it's been interesting with them because they've seen me work through this process. I tend to tell them exactly what I'm working on. Kids follow you and they watch that happening. So they've been here in this last month working on giving each other feedback on projects or math tasks that they're working on. And so they've actually asked for some help to give their peers feedback as well. So they've taken that to the next level, which I did not even anticipate that happening, but I think it's been great to have them working on giving growth-producing feedback to each other, and it also continues to hold me accountable to make sure I am giving them growth-producing feedback as well.
So this is Tina, and I wanted to share probably my favorite activity for providing feedback. So I have students for an elective, which means I only have them 45 minutes a day, and it's not a core class. So it's hard sometimes to give them feedback. They're not always working on a challenging writing assignment. They're doing different things with me. So my favorite thing is gameplay, and it's not just a free-for-all gameplay, but it's games that are very purposeful, and we pick them. They're leveled, and they're also meant to be played individually. So the students, as they play these games, it gives me that authentic opportunity to walk around and listen to what they're saying when they're wanting to give up or they're putting the game away, and I can say, hey, let's pull that back out. Let's see what you've tried. What strategies have you tried? What resources have you used? Maybe you do need to put it away for a minute and try it again. And then to watch them evolve, because over time what they'll start saying is, wow, this is really easy. Why was level 1 so hard and now level 12 is so easy? And we can go back and say it's not easy, but you have built that connection that it's become easy for you. And so then another thing we do as a district, which I love, we have a Scholastica tournament based off this gameplay. And we do it twice a year. We bring all the students in. It's a different set of games, so they're all new and the students haven't played them. So they come in, they get set with all the other students, and they play games they've never played before. But they have to use the same strategies, not give up. They have to use their resources. They can talk to other people. And really what they find is that they have to have a growth mindset in order to be successful. And so that's worked really well for our district, and the kids love to do that. The other thing I just want to share, I do use the Brainology online program, and I know someone put in a question about that. The Brainology online is a great program. It has an online component to it, and it has journaling and reflections that the kids put in. But they also do activities in person in class where we can talk and have discussions. But what I love about it are the weekly assessments. So I'm able to give those students individual and specific feedback to help support healthy self-talk. And so the example I have up here is a student who didn't run for Senate. And what he was reflecting on was something where he had used a fixed mindset. And what he wrote on there, I know it's hard to read, but he wrote that he was intimidated by the other people running for the position, and so he didn't apply. But what he also wrote is that next time he's going to give it a try, because now he sees that he should have tried it. And so I'm able to give him that feedback on those assessments. And so that's something I really I find useful in the Brainology program.
That last step of our 5 steps is setting challenging goals, and I think that we've all at some point in our career have taught goal setting, and we've probably all tried different strategies, and where we try to push this to be just a little different, and maybe you do this already, is really steering away from the goals that we know kids will eventually get with time, but more about having them choose a kind of that daring goal that maybe they don't think they can actually achieve, so that they will channel then those strategies and self-talk that they've been working on and experience that productive struggle. So having them choose a goal and maybe not having a timeline attached to it, and whether it's school or not school is your choice for your setup, but really putting that practice into action. So this last slide talked about behaviors as a way to do it, but it could certainly be academics as well. It could certainly be activities outside of school. But another example we have here is about a school-wide approach to it.
So at East Middle School, our 7th grade team came up with this idea, and so I put the link to the YouTube video by Josh Kaufman. And basically Josh talks about his own personal research that he did about what it takes to learn something new. And so of course he ended up with the 10,000 hours in the Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers. And then from that he kept doing research, but really that 10,000 hours was to be the top of your game, the top of your profession. It takes 10,000 hours. And what he found is that really it's 20 hours to learn something new. And so our 7th grade team has all of our 7th graders pick something challenging and new for them. And then their goal is to learn that in 20 hours. So they learn everything from juggling to knitting, throwing a knuckleball, baking, and so once they've learned that and they've spent the 20 hours, then they come back and they share that with their peers. They take them out. As a matter of fact, when I went in the other day, they were out all watching one of the students throw a knuckleball. So they get to share it with their peers, and what's kind of interesting about it are the students, particularly our students in the challenge program that are all identified gifted, but that they struggle with that need to master and perfect something, and so it's often very hard for them to only spend 20 hours and to be okay with sharing something that they haven't mastered. But they do find that hard work and effort and putting in that time, they do learn something new. And so I think it's a cool project that they can bring back and share and learn a lot about their mindset.
This next one actually supports work that Tina was just sharing, in that this is a great activity to do to get ready to choose a goal. It's called the strategy box, and I think it's been used before when talking about growth mindset. But it's having quadrants, and in 3 of those quadrants you list things that you are good at or have recently achieved. And in the last one you might list something that you are currently working on. But what's important to note is that in the 3 that you have achieved, you're going to list important strategies and steps or beliefs that helped you be successful. And that could be that you watched others, that you had folks coach, that you read more research or got feedback from others, but which of these 3 things that you recently achieved, which of those strategies could transfer to something you're currently working on? What we like about this activity is it's very empowering about things students have already used and been successful, and then feeling empowered by that strategy and then transferring it to something new. So that's an activity that you might do with learners to get them ready for that goal setting. We mentioned earlier that we would have the resources listed here. We can certainly get you any others that we may have mentioned and didn't put on here, but we know how valuable it is to have takeaways and resources certainly at this time of year or any time of year. So we hope that this is capturing most of the things that we referenced. And then, go ahead.
And just to reference too, I've seen some questions about the online learning and stuff. I would definitely recommend checking out that U-Cubed website. It's from Joe Bowler, who wrote that Mathematical Mindsets, and it really takes Carol Dweck's research and puts that into a math frame for you. But the U-Cubed website has activities for your classroom. It even has an online learning component that they can take. I've taken 5th graders and put all of that work into a Google Classroom for the 5th graders to come in and work on a couple times a week, and most of them work on it outside of the classroom because they like it. So it has videos and they have discussions about it, and that, just a fabulous website that's filled with resources.
And I would say Brainology, which was referenced also as an online component. Mindset Works has things online as well as translated in Spanish. So a lot of these, this is the website that supports the book. So hopefully you'll be able to pull things that you need that can support your 5 steps for the kids that you serve. But I'm sure it's time probably for us to have conversations. So thank you.
Great. Wow. Thank you guys so very much. What a wonderful conversation with the insights and examples and strategies you provided. I'm truthfully so inspired by the creativity and the evidence that growth mindset is really embedded into the culture across your entire district, and it's really exciting. And I think I speak for a lot of folks in the room when I say I'm really excited about the strategies you shared with us today. So now let's open it up for questions. So folks, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box. We're going to use the remaining time here today to do our best to address these. So I will pose the questions to Rebecca and her team here, and they will do their best to answer them. So Michelle is asking if you guys might have recommendations for children's literature that teaches about growth mindset. So do you have any recommendations there?
We do have a list that we've generated as a district to buy more resources for K-12, and we can certainly send that out afterwards to the attendees. But I think we also have some quick ones that you could take. Another site?
I think my favorite one that I like with my primary kiddos is the book Stuck. And what to do with an idea and what to do with a problem. So there are 3 titles that are great resources. There's a ton online if you just Google that, growth mindset books for children.
Oops-ish, right?
Yeah.
Great elastic brain.
The dot.
Yeah, dot, you know. I'm sure we could think of more, but I think if you want an extensive list, we could certainly send that out afterwards that we've been vetting.
Yeah.
And it has some high school references as well.
And I saw another question about the data behind that, and interestingly enough, I kind of created my own data just to see if what I was teaching was working over the last couple of years, and it was very surprising. I just took some questions, like an example would be, I can change my own talent. I can change my own intelligence, and the kids would agree with that statement or disagree with that statement. And then over the year, that's a lot of what we worked on in the classroom. And, you know, the first year I had about 60% of kids that felt like they could change their talent. And a lot of kids felt like they could change their intelligence, but they couldn't change their talent. So we did a lot more learning around that as well. So by the time we came to, after 2 years of that, that number was up in the high 80s. Of percentage of kids that felt like they could change their abilities and their talent.
And something, this is Tina, so at the middle school level, we use the Brainology with our 6th graders, and one cool component is that they do a pre-assessment of their mindset, and then they take that same thing at the end of it. And I've always had anywhere from, you know, 80 to 90% growth in their mindset, moving, and it's within a continuum, but they all make movements towards that growth mindset by the end of the elective.
Great, thank you so much. That's so interesting about the perception of growing your talent versus, you know, and assessing a kid based on that and changing your strategies to figure out how you can build mindset around talent too. That's really interesting. So we had a question from Christy, and she asked, if the examples that you showed are in the resources that you shared. So I'm guessing that those examples probably are not in all of the resources, but we will share this entire slide deck with you all, and we'll provide a link and a follow-up email to you all. So you'll be able to go back through the slide deck and also view the entire recording so you can listen to how they explained it again so that you can implement it in your own classrooms as well. So Rebecca, team, any comments on that one?
I think you're right. I think where we explicitly reference where they came from, we try to put that in the slide or at least in the recording. If they weren't referenced, they may have come from resources out there that we modified or tweaked. Some are original, but the whole idea is to share, and we would encourage people to reach out to us if they need any further examples or explanations, and we would love to grow a network of folks doing this work that we can learn and share with and from.
Excellent. So we had a question, and this is one that we hear often from folks trying to do this work. So what are the pitfalls that a teacher should be aware of when trying to implement growth mindset? Are there any particular challenges you faced in implementing this into your classrooms and pedagogies?
Well, I think that, some of the challenges are probably that presupposition that people might have about certain populations and people thinking that school worked well for them and maybe this is more challenging. And I think you're going to have those conversations with any transformation that you might be encountering. One of the pitfalls, I think, which is why we really wanted to be explicit that it's 5 steps, is that sometimes people will only do that second step, which is teaching the difference between growth and fixed, and think that they've got it covered. Or keep trying, keep working, you can do it, just don't give up, without really investigating the strategies that that learner used, where they were feeling those challenges, and where they were feeling successes, and having them dig into what they were feeling as they were going through that. I think that can be a misstep, is often just talking about the difference between growth and fixed or the continue is not enough. And sometimes people might think if they spend that time and they do incredible visuals of it, which I love, but if they don't get reference or have them tied back into instruction across the day, they can sometimes just sit on that wall. And so I think that's a pitfall that you want to try to avoid. Other piece I think was more about the parents piece, and I think we can talk about that as a group. I can share airspace on that one.
As an instructional coach where I've been working at, one question, I do teach this explicitly separate from the classroom teacher, but now that it's been happening for 2 years, now it's embedded in all of the classrooms. So I've been working with the students and with the staff aligned as we've all been learning more and strategies for how to have a growth mindset and recognizing our mindset, whether if it's growth or fixed, and having some strategies to work towards that. It's amazing that the kids are not the ones you struggle with. It's the peers, it's the parents, but it's great. I've done a lot of math nights, growth mindset parent nights, where I have just involved them utilizing websites. There's surveys that parents can come in and take online that's 2 to 3 questions that then gives them some resources, just how to change their words at home for how kids are responding to different things.
So one thing I just wanted to add as far as the parents and how to get the word out, we bring the parents in for a parent meeting, and I have the kids teach them the games. And so they can also, in an authentic way, they automatically have that self-talk. So as the parents are struggling through the levels, the kids are saying, oh, it's okay, stick with it, Dad, it gets easier, just keep doing it. And so that's one way we've tried to just involve the parents in what we're doing, and they see it. They see it authentically right there.
And I would like to piggyback on that too. When you get your learners invested and they're on board with you, they're so excited to share with their parents. And so I really think that deals with the negativity that parents may bring in. We have a program at our school that we call Early Bird Reading, and that's where every child has an adult to read with. And many of our parents drive their children to school, and so we take the opportunity for their child to teach every parent about a growth mindset activity that they've done or self-talk that they're doing, and then we encourage parents to employ that at home as well. Something else that we've done in our school to help get parents on board, our principal, the first year we implemented this a couple years ago, our principal would have monthly meetings, and she would invite parents in, and there was standing room only in that during those sessions because they wanted to learn about growth mindset, what their kids were coming home and talking about. And then also we send home weekly or monthly newsletters, and we would put information about growth mindset in those newsletters, and I really think that helped to change the mindset and the culture of our school.
And most parents do love this. And so I think what we want to reference is we're talking about when you do have some feedback, whether it's from parents or teachers or community, it's a very empowering language. It's great to hear elementary kids teaching their parents about neuroplasticity and talking about how they can grow neural pathways. And you might want to think about having channeling your growth mindset voice on this. And I've heard lots of stories across the community where parents have shared with us how their kids have helped coach them through very interesting situations. And I think that that's important to add to that as well. There's some great resources on the Stanford website for parents. It's called a parent workshop class where they have videos and questions to guide parents that I know a lot of parents enjoy saying, going to a Stanford site for them. That's been helpful. I love that the Mindset Works has parent booklets and guidelines in 2 languages, which is really helpful. I've seen parent PTA groups take this and own this as something that they do for the school, for new families coming in and teaching about that. So there's lots of different ways that it can be very empowering for different stakeholder groups.
Great, thank you. And we had an interesting question come in from Stephanie. She asked, do all educators buy into growth mindset, or have you witnessed any pushback from seasoned teachers or other educators while making this shift?
Well, I think whenever something like that happens, especially in transformation, I think you have to reflect on your messaging as well. How was it introduced? Is there an expectation? Is it coming packaged with something else that may feel like it's a top-down thing? And really trying to understand what it is that people are pushing back on first, looking at ourselves and that messaging piece of it. And then thinking about where people are coming into it. Is it anxiety, or is it a fear of loss of control about the way they normally do things? And I think once you can determine whether it's about changing the way they normally do things, that has a more productive conversation with teachers. If it's about anxiety because they don't feel like they understand enough, then that's on us to provide more training and education to inform people to bring them along in that journey. So, I think that that's probably the case for many things that you do as far as transformation. I do think, though, that as far as topics go, I wouldn't say this is the easy, quick win, but in some ways, when you compare all the other things you might be doing for personalized learning, this is typically pretty well received. And I think people can see the results in their language and how they address challenges, and parents can see that in their own children right away. It almost builds momentum, and it's a great way to get started, and it's an important way to get started.
That's great, thank you. And we had a quick question from Susan as well. I know the focus here was primarily on elementary and middle school, but she asked if you are aware of any specific resources for the high school level around growth mindset.
Well, my past is high school, so that's my personal experience about where I came up with the stuff. I think, you're looking at teaching the brain much differently then. You're really going into a much more scientific approach, and I think that you can basically change all of those steps to really meet high school folks. There's a lot of great resources about that piece that they can take from psychology today, as well as Mindset Works. So I do feel like there's a lot of examples for it to be in high school, and sometimes we drop off some of those things. But in high schools that still do advisory or in clubs, there's a way to bring it in, and then it filters into the other classes. I think it's extremely important with what we know about executive functions and the teenage brain that we don't take for granted that they don't need to constantly be working on that and rewiring as well.
Great, thanks. I think we might have time for one more question. We have about 1 minute left. And Susan's asking again if you think growth mindset teaching can help with classroom management.
I do, we do, because I think when kids are aware of their behavior and they're aware of what led up to that behavior, they're more apt and more suited to make change, which is why we talked about the change in behavior, which is really often associated with just their personal behavior one-on-one with each other. self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management. They all come to play in the classroom, and sometimes just having those kinds of teacher-created rules don't always invite them in, but when you also don't investigate why you have those rules or what they produce for a productive learning environment, that doesn't include them in that piece. Having kids be aware of what causes their behavior, aware of how they can change it, a belief in that they can do that does filter into school culture. Would you guys agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I would just add too that self-talk of the reflections or the feedback, it's a great way to see individually what the kids are thinking and what they're going through, and sometimes it's a good insight into some of what's going on behind the behavior. And so having those personal conversations with the student and giving them feedback through a growth mindset really helps.
And coming from an elementary level, we've got feedback from our middle school that's been the kids that have come into them from our school, that they definitely already have a good grasp on what's happening. They know how to talk themselves through a struggling situation. They're the kids that are encouraging other kids not to give up and pulling out those strategies that we've taught them in elementary into middle school.
Great, thank you. Well, I believe we are 1 minute over time, so I'm going to wrap up with a sincere thank you to our presenters today. I'm inspired, and I really hope that our attendees today learn some strategies and examples that they can implement in their own classrooms. From the comments in the chat box, people are certainly excited about this and are very appreciative as well. So please join me in thanking our presenters in the chat box. And I know you all are getting ready for year-end and graduation, so thank you all for spending an hour with us today and learning together. It's very great work, and District 51 in Colorado is doing tremendous work in personalized competency-based education. So if you haven't checked them out, definitely connect with them and learn together. They're doing some really great things. And as a reminder, we'll send you an email update with links to this webinar archive and the slides so you can have access to this great presentation and share it with your school as well. So with that, I will close today. Thank you all very much, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for the opportunity. We have a lot to learn from everybody else, too, so we look forward to the conversations continuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.